and between people and lunch. But Mika and Andrew, I have a question. You know, Katie and Angio and Emily, and where the white man at? This is a tech conference. You realize technology is disruptive. It changes things, so you have to keep some traditions alive. You know, hundreds of years of affirmative action for white men. You can't just do this. Shame on you. You should try a little harder. So is the internet our Sherpa? I am going to be talking about the capacity building of the internet and social movements and what I've been studying in multiple countries. I'm going to tell you guys 2 short stories, one from Egypt and one from Turkey, and then talk about all this empowerment we have coupled with the sense of disempowerment. So Tahrir supplies the Twitter feed that popped up in November of 2011 during huge clashes in Egypt between protesters and the government, where they had set up 10 field hospitals around the area in Tahrir because thousands of people were getting injured. This was not a small thing. About 34 people died. Major, once again, field hospital operation. And what was happening is the supplies are very hard to manage. You know, which one had doctors and which one had betadine and which one had, you know, surgical sutures. This Twitter feed popped up and said, we're going to take care of this. We're going to do the organizing and the logistics. I watched this happen. They did. They put up a Google spreadsheet, round-the-clock phoning. They put up their, you know, their Twitter feed, and they organized 10 field hospitals. Just really not a minor logistic feat. After this ended, I talked to them. I said, you know, what made you think you could do this, organize 10 field hospitals? And the person I talked to was a 22-year-old pharmacy student who wasn't even in Cairo. He was in Dubai. He said, cupcakes. Cupcakes? He said, yeah, cupcakes. I said, okay, cupcakes? He said there was this cupcake store in, you know, Cairo, Nola Cupcakes. They were doing such a good thing with their social media feed. I thought we can organize the field hospitals. I said, sure. Great, yeah, cupcakes, 10 field hospitals. I am glad you do not know history. I am glad you don't know, you know, how Hitler and Napoleon had failed because logistics and why Moscow still speaks Russian. I am not going to tell you anything. It was pretty amazing. Another example I have is from Turkey when news breaks on Instagram. As you might have been following, Turkey and Twitter have a problem. But Instagram is also where, you know, where people Instagram their lunch or coffee or whatever in Turkey. Sometimes mass news, very important news that's been censored, breaks on Instagram. This is an example when a Kurdish village near the border, under still murky conditions, the military bombed and killed dozens of villagers. All mass media knew of this, and everybody was waiting for the government to tell them what they should say. So this major, important, crucial news was sitting in the newsrooms and nobody was reporting it. One person, Serdar Akanan, who I talked to, he said he just couldn't forget he was a journalist, so he just bought his own plane ticket. He flew to the area. He took a cab. He took a minivan. He walked. He got to the village, and he put this picture of this very poignant snake in coffins. And then he put pictures of the families and the interviews on SoundCloud and on Twitter, which completely changed the media environment in Turkey because all of a sudden people realized, wait, the mass media is censored, but we can get the news. So after this, 3 or 4 youngsters, there are usually 3 of them, but sometimes a 4th one, decided, watching this, they said, why don't we organize citizen journalism in Turkey so the next time that happens, it doesn't depend on Serdar who's on there, and we can just have this network and everybody can report and we will make sure mass media censorship never works. I said, how long did it take you to decide this? They said, well, we thought about it for one evening and we said, yeah, sure, let's do it. I said, one evening? You planned this out for one evening? They said, well, maybe there was some beer and alcohol involved and we were a little, yeah. I said, okay, I am glad you don't know anything about history either. The thing is, though, it's these 3, they're in their early 20s, like the Tahrir supplies. Thing is, they were able to do this. I have been watching over the past 2 years the mass media censorship get broken again and again to the point that mass media feels like they can't censor as they did because people take to Twitter and people take to Facebook, and people break the news. And this is such a common thing. I went to Gezi protests, I did interviews, I participated as a researcher, I got tear gassed, and I saw this all the time. When something happens, people take out whatever they have, they broadcast. The other month in the parliament, the parliament has a television in Turkey, and they shut off, they censored their live stream because some bribery, corruption was being discussed. A deputy took out her iPad and live streamed. They've learned this, and 140 journalists has been central to this whole organizing. So they have completely changed the way mass media censorship works in Turkey, and that is why, you know, Twitter occasionally gets pulled and all of that. Compare this to the past, the civil rights movement. You know, when they had to organize the march, this is the Montgomery bus boycott, they had to get the word, after Rosa Parks got arrested, it wasn't the first one. There had been incidents, but that's when they decided we are gonna now start the boycott. And they wanted to get the word out, but not completely be out in case it didn't work. So they had to stay, you know, figure out a way to tell the black residents of Montgomery that the boycott was about to start, but kind of keep it a secret. So Joanne Robinson, who was an activist with the NAACP and a college professor, snuck into the mimeograph, that's the one in the middle, in her college, and they stayed up all night and they mimeographed these leaflets, and they had to sort of by hand deliver them to the all the community, and it worked. And this was much harder. But wait, the civil rights movement, it worked, right? They got the civil rights legislation passed, and while the United States still has a long, long way to go in making progress in this, it is still not the country it was in 1960. It's not the country it was in 1965 even. You know, the civil rights movement has had these great successes, whereas you look at movement after movement after movement around the world. Not just Gezi, not just Tahrir, Zuccotti, Occupy, right? M15 in Spain, which was a massive movement. We had anti-austerity protests in UK. We had these movement after movement that have such energy, such power, such creativity, and such great logistics and such great tools. But the impact is disproportionately weak compared to some of the past movements. So what is going on? How are we so empowered at the same time as we look around and we see the policies and the governments and the things we're pushing against so the same, you know, time after time. So I've been puzzling over this. And one of the things I have decided is that one of our unrecognized problems is that the internet is great. It's awesome. It is very powerful. I also agree with Katie. Governments aren't stupid, right? So they're not going to just sit and wait. But all this power is somewhat like our Sherpa. And what do I mean? This is a picture of people climbing Mount Everest. By climbing, I mean holding onto a rope that the Sherpas before them have put out there at the risk of their lives, by the way. And when 14 of them died this year, people kind of got this awakening. So they're, by climbing, it's a very dangerous ice fall, but people don't climb it or mountaineer it the regular way. Somebody else has put a rope for them. In fact, this is causing a major problem because tons of people for whom Everest is on their bucket list and who are not mountaineers are showing up. This is the Hillary step. This is the final ascent to the summit. If you have any mountaineering experience, this is actually not a very hard last bit, but it is above 8,000 feet. Since so many people are having Sherpa-laid ropes to kind of help them along, and their Sherpas carrying their oxygen tanks, and their Sherpas carrying their everything, you know, their Sherpas carrying sometimes their cameras, there's overcrowding. And this is no joke because it's over 8,000 feet. A sudden change in weather, a storm exposure. I mean, just having to wait in line for an hour because too many people who are not qualified enough to go up this thing, which is actually not very hard because they're so bad at it, they take their time. This could be a danger. So the mountaineering community has been wondering about it. And somebody suggested putting a ladder there, you know, the final step, so that people don't risk exposure. Can you imagine that? You know, you get up to the top of the Everest and you climb up a ladder. I have a better suggestion. Why don't we just put a Starbucks up there too while we're at it? You know, if it's in your bucket list, you might as well, you know, have a cup of coffee and somebody makes some money. The point is, people who have no mountaineering capacity are being helped along by their Sherpas to a place, and they're not able to handle what that challenge is, right? I mean, some of these people who've summited Everest, I'm not sure, you know, forget a real tough mountain like K2, I'm not sure they could climb Mount Rainier. I'm not sure I'd want to go on a hike on Sugarloaf Mountain with them. They are not qualified to climb mountains, they're being helped along. I think in some ways, the internet is helping us in a similar way. What's wrong with easy, you're going to say? There's nothing wrong with easy. I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with easy. The problem isn't easy. The problem is the lack of easy had built a certain kind, that had forced us into a certain kind of capacity building. The Montgomery African American Association, 60 of them had crisscrossed that community so they could distribute those leaflets in a night. And if you have 60 organizations that crisscross that community, you have other capacities, strategic leadership. You have organizational capacity. You've dealt with questions of delegation and who represents. You've built group cohesion. You've done all sorts of things. So abundance of easy now is creating a lack of capacity building. I'm not advocating lack of easy. Once again, it is a certain capacity that we need. And capacity is the word Amartya Sen uses, a developmental economist with a Nobel Prize. He said, let's stop measuring how many fish people have in countries. Let's start measuring how much capacity to catch fish they have. And I want to approach social movements this way. Let's stop thinking all the great things we can do with the internet, and let's think what are the capacities we need and which ones are we and are we not building. So it's not the degree of difficulty you overcome. It's the degree of capacity you build while overcoming that difficulty. So if something's easy and you're doing your logistics with 3 youngsters who are creative and amazing and wonderful, and that's what you're doing your logistics, well, what is doing your organizational thinking and strategic capacity? You know, where those things used to come along with the ride almost. Now they don't. So it's not lack of risk-taking. I want to be clear. This is a picture I took in Gezi, 2 young women. They wrote their blood types on their arm as the night fell because that's when the police attacked. The current movements are not disproportionately less in their policy impact because people are not taking risks. In Occupy, people took risks. In Egypt, 800 people died the first 18 days. They're still opposing a military regime. It's not slacktivism. That concept is worse than useless. As Emily made the case great, as Anja made the case, and as Katie's research shows, it matters. I mean, I keep wanting to not talk about slacktivism because I want authoritarian governments to believe this theory, but they're not fooled. If they were, they wouldn't, you know, be so harsh on the internet. Changing people's mind is one of the most powerful long-term powers of the internet. The thing that gets derided as slacktivism over the long term is probably going to be, you know, 20 years later, people will recognize this is one of its most powerful affordances. It's not lack of weak or strong ties. That gets thrown around. Movements these days, these people have weak ties. They have strong ties. They go to protests. They bleed together. They form strong ties. They go to protests with people they know. No research shows that there's some major difference. But it's not online versus offline. Streets are nothing but signals. You know, when we go on the street, I was there. This is February 2004, war against the march against the war on Iraq. It didn't mean anything. It's not like streets have some magic. It's not like offline has some magic that's going to, you know, if we all go to the streets, it's going to work. The question is, what are we signaling? What capacity? When you had the March on Washington, that was signaling a certain kind of capacity that the 2004 march, which was easier to organize, is not signaling. And SOPA people, I know we love to think, oh, great, but you know what? It's because the Congress didn't realize it wasn't signaling that capacity. The Congress people who got hundreds of thousands of phone calls, in the past, it would have signaled the capacity for a primary challenge for them. It would have signaled the capacity that would hurt them. Now it actually signaled the fact that Google and Tumblr changed their homepage. I don't think it's going to work the same way again because governments learn, as Katie talked about, they learn to read our signals and what capacity it does and does not. And governments have gotten much better at dealing with the threat that comes from social media and correctly reading what capacity it signals and figuring out whether to wait or not. So everyone is learning. This is a February 2011, Mubarak sent people on camels, thugs on camelbacks against the protesters when the protesters were using smuggled satellite phones to give live interviews to the BBC. This is not going to happen again. Nobody's going to be Mubarak again. All governments are learning, and they are learning to read our signals correctly. And in social movements, I feel like we're still hand-painting our books. We have the printing press. The one here is handwritten. This is the Book of Kells. This is handwritten. This is the Gutenberg Bible. They look the same because people hadn't realized how to think about the capacity of the printing press. So what we're doing a lot of times is we're using the internet. It's kind of like horseless carriage, right? We're using it to emulate old systems and thinking they're going to work the same way instead of thinking, how do we build our capacity and how do we signal it in a way so that we are not just anti-power, we're also counter-power. We are a power that we impact power, we change it, because as we've been talking all day, it's not like our overlords are doing a great job, but they're doing a good job countering the challenge, and the challengers need to do a better job figuring out what capacity we need for the next steps. So not harder, but smarter, but also more boring. Sometimes capacity building is boring, and we need to think about that. Thank you.